Hi, I'm horror author Paul Edwards. Tonight on Why Monster Lost, I'm going to talk about why King Kong won and Godzilla lost when they squared off in the Battle of the Century, the 20th century that is. King Kong versus Godzilla, released in Japan in 1962, released in the United States in 1963. This is the 13th episode of the Why Monster Lost podcast, but I've got a whole bunch of new subscribers since the last time I did this, so I'm going to fill you in on the joke, okay? Years ago, my friend Jessica Lewis competed on Survivor, season 33, Millennials versus Generation X. I'll save you the trouble of looking it up. No, she did not win. But because she competed on Survivor, she got a gig hosting a podcast called Why Blank Lost. This is their t-shirt. And she and her co-host talk each week on their podcast about why that week's reality TV contestants got voted out, and at the end of the season, why the winner won the season. And it's usually because they didn't follow certain rules that the hosts have written up for us. So I thought it would be funny when I first started my channel if I did a monster version of Why Blank Lost, because monster fans are always having these discussions. Which monster would win in the fight? How come this monster beat that monster? So I did. And although Jessica does watch my channel sometimes, she didn't see it. So I did another one, and she didn't see that. So it became a running gag, and every few weeks I've been putting out another Why Monster Lost podcast, and I'm going to keep doing them until one day Jessica finally notices and I get a text message saying, "Paul, are you making fun of my show?" And I'm not making fun of Jessica's show. If anything, it's just that everything should be monsters, so why not take her idea and run with it in the world of monster fandom? So why King Kong won and why Godzilla lost is pretty self-evident if you've seen the film. King Kong had appeared in 1933 in the RKO film, and there had been a sequel to that, Son of Kong, which came out the same year, but it didn't have King Kong himself in it. Meanwhile, Godzilla had appeared in 1954 in Godzilla King of the Monsters, and had followed that with what was released in America as Gigantus the Fire Monster, but internationally it was known as Godzilla Raids Again. And in that film, he fought another monster called Anguirus. So this was the third film in both the Godzilla franchise and the King Kong franchise. And the idea for this film, unfortunately, is not credited to the person who deserves credit. Willis O'Brien, the special effects wizard who brought King Kong to life by stop motion animation back in 1933, he had the idea for King Kong to fight a giant version of the Frankenstein monster. And he made the mistake of telling this idea to John Beck, and John Beck wound up pitching a variation on this idea to Toho Studios in Japan without giving credit to Willis O'Brien. And instead of it being Frankenstein's monster, it was King Kong fighting against Godzilla. So no credit was given in the final product to Willis O'Brien. It should have been. But in this film, King Kong was clearly the underdog. There was no question about that. Everybody knew that Godzilla was a bigger monster. Everybody knew that Godzilla was a stronger monster. And of course, Godzilla had special powers. He could breathe radioactive fire, and he had a quick healing factor, although they hadn't really shown us too much of that yet in the franchise, but it is a trait that he had. And King Kong, he's certainly a tremendous gorilla, but he's a gorilla. That's it. He didn't have any special powers. So it seemed pretty clear that Godzilla was the favored contender in this bout. And what happens in the film is that King Kong is discovered on his Pacific Island habitat, captured and brought to Japan. And in the meantime, Godzilla has broken free from his entombment in an iceberg and is heading for Japan. And it seems that these monsters are on a predetermined collision course, as if they are reenacting some battle that they once had back at the dawn of time. So on their way rampaging across Japan towards their meeting point, it's discovered that King Kong, for some strange reason, draws strength from electricity, because electric wires that are set up to barricade the city to keep him out don't deter him. In fact, he enjoys getting a charge out of the electric voltage. So, of course, that's going to come into play in a moment. So Godzilla and King Kong meet up for their big showdown. And, King Kong starts roaring at Godzilla, and within moments, Godzilla uses his flame breath, his atomic fire breath, and King Kong is flabbergasted by this, and he just retreats confused because he knows he can't go up against that. But the human beings in the story force a rematch between the monsters, and here's where we get the true knockdown, drag-out fight. And as you can imagine, things are going really badly for King Kong. Godzilla is much bigger. He smacks Kong around like nothing. It's almost effortless the way that Godzilla is smacking Kong around. And he, at one point, knocks Kong to the ground and starts burying him with boulders. And all hope seems lost for Kong. And then, wouldn't you know it, Deus Ex Machina, an electrical storm passes overhead, and lightning bolts strike King Kong. And Kong becomes supercharged with electricity. And now, even though he's smaller and weaker than Godzilla, now he's got the energy to go up against Godzilla. And his now electric touch is crippling to Godzilla. Anytime that Kong punches Godzilla, the electric shock damages Godzilla. And of course, the electricity is great for Kong and detrimental to Godzilla. And now it's an even fight. And now that it is an even fight, King Kong gives Godzilla a really good battle. My favorite part of which is when Kong has absolutely had enough of Godzilla using his flame breath. So he rips a tree out of the ground and shoves it into Godzilla's mouth. And then, of course, Godzilla knows he can get out of this by using his flame breath to ignite the tree on fire and incinerate it, which he does. Then they have a big showdown at a famous castle in Japan, which they immediately, between the two of them, reduce to a hopeless pile of rubble. And the fight then goes from land into the ocean off the coast of Japan. And both monsters submerge. The battle rages on. And then we see a trail of bubbles and waves, and we see in the distance King Kong surfaces and swims away back home to his island. So there are two false narratives that have surrounded this ending. One is that King Kong must have lost and he was retreating from Godzilla. No, clearly not true. Clearly not true. And Toho's official website and materials all make it clear that King Kong won the fight. There's no openness to interpretation here. King Kong won. But a more pervasive myth about the ending of this movie is this. And I'm going to tell you the myth, and then I'm going to show you where it came from. Okay. The myth is that if you saw this movie in Japan, Godzilla won, and it was Godzilla we saw swimming away in victory. But if you saw the movie here in the Western world, King Kong won, and it's King Kong that you see swimming away. And, two different endings were filmed, and you would see one ending or the other depending on what part of the world you lived in, because Godzilla was an Eastern world monster and King Kong was a Western world monster. Okay, that's the myth. It's completely untrue. only one ending for this film was ever made, and only one ending to this film exists. And no matter where in the world you are, King Kong wins the fight. But where did we get this myth? Where did we get this idea that if you saw this movie in Japan, Godzilla was the winner? Well, there was a really obscure magazine called Spacemen, and it was put out by Forrest J. Ackerman, the editor-in-chief of Famous Monsters of Filmland. From time to time, he would try his hand at other magazines. And this magazine was the origin of the myth that there were two different endings for this movie. And your old pal, Paul Edwards, has a copy of Spacemen magazine from 1963. It's issue number 3. Spacemen magazine. It has a nice piece on King Kong versus Godzilla. This issue came out in 1963. So the movie was new to American theaters. It had already been out in Japan the year before, but now it was being released in America. And of course, this isn't even a picture of Kong from this movie. This is the Willis O'Brien 1933 King Kong. But okay. Gotta be careful with the pages. It goes on telling you about the movie and what to expect. There's Kong smashing through the electric wires that don't bother him at all. But then we get to this page, okay? This is the final page of this article. And down here, I'll try to budge up to the camera a little bit. Read this last paragraph if you would, but I'll save you the trouble. What it says is, we'll let you in on a little secret. 2 endings were made for this film. If you see this film in Japan or anywhere in the East, Godzilla is the winner. But if you see it in the United States or anywhere else in the Western world, like England, King Kong is the winner. This right here is the source. This is patient zero for the myth that spread like wildfire that there were 2 different versions of this movie. And unfortunately, we can blame our hero, Forrest J. Ackerman, who got this wrong. Now, I don't know why he got it wrong, but he did. This is the first time that this claim ever appeared in print. So right as the movie was new to American theaters in 1963, already this false rumor had started in Spaceman magazine, issue number 3 from 1963. And the rumor caught on and couldn't be stopped. It was a different world in the 60s. It wasn't so easy to correct misinformation once it had spread. I should know this firsthand because whenever I make a mistake in one of my videos and say the wrong thing, within an hour, one of you has caught the mistake and has pointed it out in the comments, which is totally fine, absolutely fine. Thank you for correcting me. But in 1963, you couldn't do that. If you read something in a magazine, even if you knew it wasn't right, there wasn't a whole lot you could do about it. The best you could do about it would be to write a letter to the editor of the magazine and hope that he printed it in some future issue. But there was no instant correction for misinformation. And so for years, this rumor persisted, this rumor of why King Kong won in some versions and Godzilla won in other versions, which is just not so. That's why I decided to entitle this video not just Why Godzilla Lost in the usual format of these, but to specifically say why King Kong won. Because I want to emphasize the fact that King Kong won in both versions of this showdown. It was funny because this was a very publicized movie. And among the publicity stunts that they tried to get theater owners to do when this movie was going to play in their town was that they were going to hire kids to walk around the main streets in town with signs saying things like, King Kong will win, or I'm for Godzilla. I don't know how successful they were in that campaign, but this was something they told theater owners to do. Another recommendation they had was to contact the local sports writers for the local newspapers and try to get them to write a column billing the matchup of King Kong against Godzilla as a sporting event. I'm not sure how much that bait was taken by any self-respecting sports writers, but it was a promotional gag that the publicists for this film thought up and tried to promote. Of course, if you're not satisfied with the ending of this movie, there's a whole other rematch in the modern Godzilla films. The 2021 film Godzilla vs. Kong finally pitted these two monsters against each other again. And I really like that film, but that's a subject for a separate video. So the answer to the question of why Godzilla lost and why King Kong won is Deus Ex Machina. And the lightning storm energizing King Kong is the only reason King Kong won his epic showdown against Godzilla. Had it not been for the lightning storm, Godzilla would have won easily. Listen, if you're a fan of classic monsters and vintage horror, you should check out my book series, the Mourner's Woods books. Basically, I write books for people who like old monster movies. That's what it is. I've written a series of stories that take place in a haunted forest. Different monsters in each book, different cast of characters in each book. They're not interconnected. You do not have to read Mourner's Swamp to understand Mourner's Cliff or anything like that. Each is a freestanding story. I'll post a link to the books on Amazon in the description for this video. My books, again, are the Mourner's Woods books. My name is Paul Edwards. Thanks for letting me talk to you some about why King Kong won, and thanks for helping me to continue to perpetuate my prank with my friend Jessica, my good-natured prank. And as always, please don't any of you go looking her up on social media and tell her that I'm doing this. Let her find out on her own. And it's just going to be so much funnier that way. Okay? So thanks for playing along. And I'll see you in Mourner's Woods.